Well, I'm ready to get back to the Star Wars universe with this Landspeeder kit. Well, hey guys, and welcome back to another Interstellar Modeler. So in the next couple videos now, I'm going to be building this one here. This is a model kit of the Landspeeder from Star Wars, and it's from Revell. I believe this was just a European release. I'm not 100% sure. But to give you a little story about this kit, I first saw the kit on a post, I believe it was on Facebook, and it was beautifully done. I've always wanted a model of the Landspeeder. I thought it'd be cool to have in my collection. So I rushed off to eBay to try to find the kit. And I did find that one. I don't believe I spent a lot of money for it, but I noticed right away that the figures that were included in the model kit were not the same as the ones that were used on that post. And so I went back and inquired about the figures, and the guy pointed me over to shapeways.com, which, if you're not familiar with, is a website that offers a lot of pre-printed 3D printed items. And the seller is Falcon 3D Parts. You can also find them on eBay, by the way. And notice they were $25 a figure. So I had already ordered the model, and I debated at that time whether to buy the figures. When the model got here, I just wasn't prepared to spend that kind of money on figures, so I just shelved the model. It's been on my shelf ever since. And recently, I was having a conversation with my friends Mark Fraley and Joe Hudson about figures in general. I can't quite recall how this all came up, but I told them about these figures, and that I thought they were a little pricey. They looked at them and they said, you know, it's not unusual to spend a bit of money on some good figures, because people do it all the time with military models. And after that conversation, I gave it more thought and decided to go ahead and pull the trigger. So I got the figures in, really happy that I bought them, because the resemblance to the characters is just amazing. So I'm going to show you those figures shortly, but I'll also first show you what comes with the model kit. By the way, what I plan to do with this model is to recreate that scene of them pulling into Mos Eisly, because that's how Ben's hand is held up here as he's trying to convince the stormtroopers that the droids aren't the ones they are looking for. And as I did a little bit of research into this, I found some stormtroopers that I was able to print. There were some files I found on cgtrader.com. I'll post a link down below. For $12, you get 24 poses of stormtroopers that you can print, and so I chose 3 of them for this project. So let's go and take a look inside the model, and I'll give you a closer look at the figures as well as those stormtroopers. Well, let's take a quick look at the box. This, of course, is the front of the box showing the completed kit. And you can see there are a couple things included in the kit. If you turn it over on the back side, now you can notice that there are several languages that are included here, so I'm pretty sure this is a Revell Germany release. They do include English here under Great Britain. And some of these picture panels, of course, are showing some more details of the kit and what's included. You can see in this bottom panel, it came with these paints and supplies here. It's been several years since I purchased the kit, and I did throw or discard all of this away. I wasn't going to use any of it anyway, except with the exception, of course, of those clippers. I kept those. Everything else was discarded. And now this is the instruction booklet, and folded inside here is the poster that was listed there on the front of the box. So that's really cool. And as you page through, they're just, illustrated instructions on what comes with the kit, and of course how to assemble it. How to assemble C-3PO there. You have the exposed part of this engine here. Some instructions on decal application, and how to detail Luke Skywalker and so forth. The model does come on 2 trees. This is the first tree showing you the upper and lower side of the speeder. Not a lot of detailing, of course, on the speeder itself, on the body there. And this, of course, is the part for that exposed section. And this goes on the back of the speeder. And this is the tree containing the cockpit, the front grille, the seats, and so forth. So, pretty straightforward. Doesn't look too complicated to put together. This, of course, is the front windshield, which I'm leaving protected in this plastic. We have the decal sheet, which I will go over here shortly. You can see that it includes some decals for the weathering in case you don't want to do the weathering yourself. Well, let's take a closer look at the figures. These are the ones, of course, included in the kit. This is Luke Skywalker. Looks a bit awkward, and you can tell there's no facial resemblance other than the way the hair is styled. Doesn't really look like him. And this is C-3PO, which isn't the worst looking figure I've ever seen, but both of them are not appropriately sized for the model. So comparing Luke Skywalker in a little more detail here for you, you can see just better facial resemblance. His head and face is positioned as if he's talking to the Stormtrooper, at least at that angle anyway. And what's interesting is that it's molded with this as what he's using to steer the vehicle with. And what's interesting, and I'll show you this shortly, there are some pictures from the Peterson Auto Museum. Apparently the Landspeeder was on display there, and it is a round steering wheel that is shown there. So it's interesting that it's molded this way here. And C-3PO, of course. And just look at Ben Kenobi. You can see the good facial resemblance there and the detailing. And of course we have R2-D2, which is going to have to be assembled. And finally what we have here are some Stormtroopers. Now these were printed using files from CG Trader. I'll post the link below. And I tried to size them the same as the figures, and they're close. Looking at the hands and putting them side by side, these might be slightly larger, but what I did was I tried to estimate at a 1/19th, 1/20th scale what the figures would be sized at, and so these are closer to 1/20th, I would say, and I think they're going to work out pretty well for this diorama here. Now, somebody reminded me that when they're in the desert, they do carry these extra packs. So I'm going to see what I can do to try to replicate or maybe scratch build those packs and see how close I can get. If it doesn't look right, I'm just going to leave them off. I know that's going to be a little inaccurate, but we'll just see how that turns out. Now, turning back to the model, I typically like to get reference pictures before I start a project and to use them as a guide. Take a look at these. These were found on Flickr, and I contacted the guy who took these pictures. He gave me permission to share them with you, so I will share the link down below. But these pictures were taken at the Peterson Auto Museum. Apparently a few years ago the Landspeeder was there on display. I wish I would have known about it. I would have gone up there to see it. But you can see these pictures here show all kinds of detail. You can see how it's painted, how the weathering is. But one thing I want you to take note of is the front of the Landspeeder here. You'll notice there's a gash there, like some damage that the Landspeeder had undergone. That is something I'm going to have to try to replicate, because if you look here now back to the instructions, the model does not come with any sort of detailing like that. So I think I have a way of doing that, but I'll go over that when we get to building the Landspeeder. Now the decals I showed you earlier provide for the markings there, but I am not going to be using those decals. Instead, I asked Lou Dalmaso if he wouldn't mind doing me a favor, and he was so kind enough to do this. He's provided me a paint mask for this project, and that's going to be a better way to produce the weathering and the striping and so forth versus using those decals. So this is what we'll be using. I'll go into more detail about this when we get to that during the build. Well, no doubt those pictures there from the Peterson are going to be invaluable for this project, so I want to thank Will for allowing me to share those. I will post the link down below. But as I was looking for reference pictures, before I stumbled across those, I referred to this book called Sculpting a Galaxy. It's a book I have in my collection by Lauren Peterson. Not sure how easy it is to get a hold of anymore, but if you can get a hold of it, it's a beautiful book. But take a look at the section for the Landspeeder here. And the only picture they show is of the little model they created for faraway shots. This, of course, was used in the original studio cut. But want you to pay attention to the two figures there standing in for Luke Skywalker and Ben Kenobi, and you can tell they are actually $6 million man figures. In fact, that's what it says in the description here. And the one on the right in particular, you can tell is a $6 million man figure, as it has that little eye that you used to be able to peer through the back of his head with. Also take a look at the lack of detailing there with C-3PO and R2-D2. Since this model was used for faraway shots, that type of detail was just not critical. So we're ready to begin our project, and what I'm going to start off with here are the figures. So that's how this video is going to conclude. Following the same logic as I did with the Galileo 7, we have 7 figures to work on here, so we have a bit of detailing to do with that, and I'd rather have all that done before we get off to the Landspeeder. So let's go ahead and begin with the figures. Well, the first step in getting our figures ready for printing is to separate them from the supports that are attached here. Most of you are aware of this, but whenever you print anything on a 3D printer, it has to be attached to the build plate somehow. And if the object is flat, you can certainly attach it to the build plate if you want to, but most often, especially with figures, that's not going to be the case. So you have to have something to support or hang on to the model as it's being printed. This is the piece then that is attached to the build plate. So they have to be separated, and one way to do that, of course, is with some sprue cutters. You can certainly pull at the supports. When they're done properly, the contact point is very, very thin, and the idea there is to try to minimize any surface defects left after you pull away the support. So using a sprue cutter is one way. You can just gently, you can see I've already done some of these here, but you basically take your sprue cutter and just gently snip away. And what I do is I start on the outside and get those taken care of, and then you start working your way in. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll start separating the model from this foot plate here. The reason I have this little tub behind it is because as you do so, the pieces can definitely fly off. So make sure you're wearing some sort of eye protection, whether it's just even a pair of reading glasses or a visor of some sort, because these pieces will definitely fly off. Now, I typically do this step before the model is cured. And the reason for that is that they're soft after they come off the printer. So I rinse it off with alcohol and then gently pull away. Actually, they just easily pull away when that's soft. Sometimes it's helpful to dip the print in warm water. You can see that's what I'm doing here with Luke Skywalker. Especially when the 3D print has not been cured yet, it really helps a lot with this. So I did try it with this. This is the first time I'm actually pulling supports off a cured print, and it really didn't do a whole lot. You can try it. It certainly didn't hurt the print. But the reason I find that helpful as well is if you're separating away from some delicate parts, to me it's a little easier if you put the print in warm water this way. But in this case, it didn't really seem to make much difference. So I'm going to continue to snip away here, and you can see how things are just flying away here. I'm just getting rid of that bottom plate so it gives me access to the center supports there. So I'll finish this up and show you the completed piece here when all these are separated. Alright, well this is how he turned out, and the guy did an excellent job with the supports. In the areas that are visible, you hardly see any defects at all, and by defects I mean remnants or divots or anything that you have to sand or take care of. You'll notice, however, in areas that are inconspicuous here, the defects are a bit larger, and that's because supports come in 3 sizes. You have large, medium, and light, and the heavier ones are ones that will hold on to the model a lot better, and so you want to put those in areas that you won't be able to see. So that's why they're in areas like this, and you'll notice these defects here on the back of Luke Skywalker and the bottom of Ben Kenobi, but these areas are not going to be seen, so not a big deal. If you do have to do any sanding or repair, just make sure you're using a mask, because as with any resin, you don't want to breathe that stuff in. Well, R2-D2 turned out well, and one thing I want to make note of is as I was separating the supports here, there was actually a little leftover resin inside there. If you take a look here, you'll see it's a little shiny there in the middle, and that's because when he rinsed the piece, there were so many supports around here, you couldn't quite get a good rinse in that area. Not a big deal in this case. It's easily cleared away. I was using 99% alcohol to do that with a Q-tip, and it easily cleaned it up. And I'm just fearful of leaving any sort of resin in there because, one, it's not good to have that stuff around, and secondly, I've had problems with it cracking models. I doubt that would happen here, but you just don't want to take any chances. And again, here's the bucket that caught all those pieces, so it's really good to have something like that to catch them, because believe me, these would be all over the place. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get these primed up, and we'll start with painting. Alright, we're getting ready to start here with Obi-Wan Kenobi, and for a primer I ended up using Tamiya's Sky Gray. This is something that my friend Joe Hudson uses all the time for his figures. And by the way, if you do hear some background noise, it's because I have the garage door open and a fan running. It's a bit warm here today in San Diego. I'm sure not as warm as some other places are, but warm enough for sure. And one other thing I wanted to make note of here is something called a paint puck. This is a nice accessory to have. It has these silicone pieces that you attach to each side of this open tube here. One is a brush holder, and the other is an area to have any excess drippings fall into. So it's a nice accessory. My wife got me this as a gift. Okay, so for Obi-Wan Kenobi, this is a picture of him now in that famous brown robe, and of course he's got the tan robes there he wears underneath that. And so for our base color, I'm going to be using a combination of burnt umber and mahogany. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and put some burnt umber here as the main color. And we're going to make our eyeball here, meaning I'm putting this in the center, so it looks kind of like an eyeball there. And this is a good way, again, to estimate a color combination. I'm sure you can measure everything down in percentages, but this method works pretty well for me. I'm just thinning the paint a little bit here, and we'll go ahead and mix it up and get started. Okay, so the brushes I'm using here are from ZenBrush. I'll go ahead and post the link below. This is the Pro Series flat brush, number 2. And again, this does require a little patience because the paint is thin, so it takes a few applications at least to cover the figure. And the feet, by the way, most of this is going to be hidden, but we're still going to go ahead and paint everything. Okay, well, the first coat has been applied, and we'll continue to add more and more layers to achieve the darkness that we are looking for. And this is how he's looking so far. The final coat has been applied. I'm going to go ahead and set him aside now because I have to actually head off to work. So to keep our paint from evaporating away, I'm just placing a bottle over that well, and use my paint puck here to rinse out the brushes, and I'm drying them this way. I also use this pink soap, as you can see here, just to make sure the brushes get nice and clean. You don't want paint to build up at the bottom of those bristles, because that is what helps those bristles start to flare out and the brush loses its shape. So I'm going to head off to work, and I'll be back in just a second. At least it's going to seem that way to you. So I am back from work now, and moving on to the shadows. So what I'm doing is I'm using this ebony flesh here from Master Series Paint as our shadow. So just kind of doing some wet blending as I apply the shadows there. So we're kind of going between the base color and the ebony. Well, I hope you can appreciate this in this lighting, but you can see all the shadows now have been applied. So what I'm going to do next is add orange and maybe a little yellow to our base color, and we'll start applying the highlights. Okay, well, here he is now, and as I usually do, I like to put a gloss coat on the figure before moving on to the rest of it, mainly just to protect the work I've done. If by chance I end up getting some flesh tone onto the robe, that stuff can easily be taken off because it's coated. You can take it off with water if you have to. So we're going to move on now to the flesh tones. Well, this is how he turned out, and I did test a few different browns for the robe. Technically his robe is a bit darker than this, but I thought the color variation was better with this particular tone, so I went with it. And yeah, the face was done using a combination of beige red and just a tiny bit of mahogany brown as the base color. Well, here we have Luke Skywalker, and I decided to leave out or not record most of the painting because I've demonstrated these techniques before. Even with Obi-Wan, I condensed that quite a bit. If you'd like to see more of these techniques, check out the Galileo build or follow along some of my painting of the busts that I've done from Blackheart models. Technique is basically the same, starting off with your base color, then progressing on to your shadows, and then blending in your highlights. For the coat now, I ended up using Vallejo's white gray, so it's not a pure white color. I reserved pure white for some of the peaks here, but for the shadows, I darkened the white gray with their dark sea gray. Now for the hair, the base color was a mix of green ochre and khaki, and a little bit of this Tierra earth. And for the shadows, I ended up using a wash of this burnt umber. This is from their Model Air collection. And then for the highlights, I mixed in a bit more of the yellow ochre, a little bit of yellow, and some khaki, and I think it turned out well. Okay, so we're going to move on to C-3PO, and I'm curious to see how this will all work out here now, because I'm going to try something different. Rather than using a spray of chrome gold, I decided to try this. I was at the model store, and it's advertised as having a very high metallic finish and shine. So as with most of these metallic paints and stuff, you want to start off with a black base. So I'm going to go ahead and paint in black and gloss that over, and we'll see how this turns out. Well, here is how C-3PO turned out. I'm very pleased with the end results here. As you can see here, what I did was I ended up pumping the paint into a glass container, because the way these paint pens are supposed to work, you're supposed to pump the nub and the paint flows over the nub onto the surface. But obviously this figure is quite contoured, so there's no way you're going to adequately get the paint to spread around. So I just used a brush. You have to work quickly because this paint dries very fast, and I'm very pleased with the shine. So other thing I did was to paint his lower right leg silver. When I posted this painted piece on Facebook, a number of people quickly reminded that his lower leg of his right leg there is supposed to be painted silver. So I used Vallejo silver for that, and that worked well. And just to enhance some of the lines along the suit and to paint in that little dent on the top of his head, I used Vallejo's brass. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start work on R2-D2. As you can see, I've got the top already painted with a chrome color. For this, I used this Rust-Oleum metallic. This is a nice spray paint for small pieces anyway. I wouldn't paint a whole model with this stuff, but works out well for these small little pieces like this. So I'm ready to paint in the blue panels. And so for the body, I ended up using Vallejo's gray-white for this. The panel lines are nice and deep, so you don't really need to enhance those any further. Well, here are the pieces for R2-D2, and gosh, it sure helps to have the right brushes. I didn't record a lot of this because this was very detailed painting, and just had to concentrate what I was doing there. But I got all the blue panels painted, as you can see there, and I'm ready to go ahead and assemble R2-D2. So I'm going to assemble the body and the legs first. I'm going to gloss coat that so I can weather that a little bit, and the final step will be to attach the dome. Well, here's the completed R2-D2 now. Well, here are the Stormtroopers. I think they turned out pretty well. Again, these were made using files from cgtrader.com. For 12 bucks you get 24 poses, and I chose these 3. And I only had light gray resin on hand. You can either print these in black or white to make it just a little easier for yourself. But being that I just had light gray, I had the task of painting not only the armor but the black areas in between. It wasn't too bad to do that. As you can see, that's what I'm doing here with a fine brush, getting in between there with black. I used some liquid mask along the edge of the armor to prevent black from getting onto there. And it didn't take too long to do. For the guns, I did paint them this German gray. This is from Vallejo, just to differentiate them a little bit from the black, and dry brushed on some silver to bring out some of the details. Now, you'll see these little details here have been colored as well. To get in between these tiny little areas, I just used the panel line color from Tamiya. You can see it worked out well, just applying a little bit of that color in between. And the same technique was used to color in these rectangular areas here along the rim of the helmet. Now, I do have to go a little further here and weather them, but one other thing I need to do is to make a backpack. Now, when I posted this project on Facebook, someone quickly pointed out that Desert Troopers have a backpack. This now is the Black Series figure, one of their best figures here. And this is an example of what the backpack looks like. Now, before doing any painting, I actually went ahead and looked to see if anyone made a Desert Trooper, just to see if that was possible, to maybe get some files for that, but no one does. However, I just so happened to come across on cults3d.com some files for printing a backpack for a Hot Toys Stormtrooper, so you can add a backpack to one of those. So I bought those files, and that's what you hear printing in the background. We're going to see if we can go ahead and create a backpack using those parts. So once those parts are printed, we'll go ahead and get started with that, and we'll see if we can make some backpacks. Well, here are the 3D printed pieces for the pack, and if it looks like I have a lot, that's because I do. I actually printed some of these twice. So yesterday I printed these, and these were sized at 22% of what they're originally sized at. And that was based on taking this piece of styrene, which I had measured for the Stormtrooper's back, and fitting in this piece that looks like a radio onto this corner. As I was setting up the files to be printed, I realized it came with a rack, and so I kept it all the same size, and you can see the rack is pretty small. So obviously these were undersized, but I had a feeling if I printed all of these at the same percentage as I was increasing them to, I was a little concerned they wouldn't all fit on the rack. So I just selectively chose some, and that's what these are here. And so the rack now is sized to the Stormtrooper's back much better. And I printed these other pieces at this size. This is 35% now of what they originally were sized at. So I put them together using that Black Series Stormtrooper as a guide, and this is what it looks like. So I'm very pleased with it. This came out really well, and sure enough, there was no way all of these pieces would have fit on there. I'm sure they're designed to do that, but I just felt it wouldn't look quite right. So this is going to work out great. We can put them up to our Stormtrooper here. I'm going to glue it onto the back here with some super glue, and you can see it's sized pretty much the same as our Black Series figure. So I'm going to go ahead and put the other two together, paint it black, and add a little bit of color based on that Black Series figure, and I'll show you those when they're completed. Well, here are the troopers now, and I'm very pleased with how everything turned out. The pauldron actually looks pretty good, I think. That was sculpted from epoxy sculpt putty, and this is a clip showing you that process, just using my sculpting tools to make it look right, and of course that was allowed to dry before painting. And the weathering was done with just flicking on some khaki paint from an old brush, and they were finished off with a Tamiya weathering kit using some brown pigment. The backpacks, man, they turned out really good. I really couldn't have hoped for any better than that. Just happened to stumble across this, as I said, on Cults 3D, and man, it just really turned out better than I could hope for. Alright, well I hope you enjoyed following along. That is going to be a wrap for this video. Before I go, I want to show you one last shot of all of the figures together. So glad I spent the time to detail these. I think they're going to add a lot to our project. So as usual, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me here on my YouTube channel or at InDesOtoModeler@gmail.com. So part 2, we'll move on to the Landspeeder and display. I'll see you in that video. Take care.